Welcome to this episode of Therapyology Thursday. We are continuing our therapist spotlight, but we're transitioning it to include more professionals who work in mental health and other fields. So today I have Sam from Tap Into Nutrition with me, and we're going to ask to know all about her and all of
Mhm.
what she does at Tap Into Nutrition and how she became a registered dietitian.
Cool. Thanks
Good.
for having me.
Yeah.
This is
So
fun.
if you could introduce yourself and just tell us about like you, your credentials, and tap into nutrition.
Yeah. So my name is Sam. I have a private practice called Tap Into Nutrition, and I am a registered dietitian that specializes in people's relationships with food. So, talking all about food from a place of physical health, but also mental health as well. So, helping people really redefine their relationship to food and their bodies in a way that is supportive for their entire body, which is really fun.
Yeah, I love that. How did you
Thanks.
get into this field?
So, I actually babysat for someone who was a dietitian when I was young, and I was so fascinated by the work that she did, and the way that she talked about food with her family and, being a part of that household,
Mhm.
right? And so, really young, I wanted to go into nutrition and learn more about it. I realize now that a lot of that was due to a really unhealthy relationship with food
Okay.
and an unhealthy relationship with body and movement and health. And very much with this idea that if I knew or if I know how to help people lose weight, one, that's really comforting for myself because then I can guarantee that I can be skinny for the rest of my life,
Mm,
which as a child, you equate that with, or maybe as an adult too, you equate that
yeah.
with healthy, happy, right? Like you got it
Desired,
together.
beautiful. Yeah.
Sure. Um, so that really pushed me to go into nutrition and to pursue it in college, which I did. And unfortunately, within the um, going to school to become a dietitian, there's such an emphasis on food,
Yeah.
obviously, right? Which really breeds a lot of us having a really unhealthy relationship to food or viewing food in a
Mm,
very all or nothing way.
yeah.
So, within that, it really put me into, I would say, like a spiral coming out of school of I don't know what to do with this information. And so much of it was rooted in like the medical nutrition therapy
Mm,
piece of food versus the actual behavior change and how we can
mhm,
support behavior change and help people have a healthier relationship with food.
mhm,
So, following my schooling, I was very much just like pushed into a clinical job and
mhm,
working with people and talking to them like really quickly about a handout on how they can eat more fruits and vegetables.
gosh.
And it was so unrewarding. And it felt like used I wasn't using my knowledge effectively, and
Mm,
also that we didn't know how to talk to people about their
yeah.
relationships with food and also just like their health. Like it didn't
Mhm,
feel like we knew how to make sustaining change for folks, which ultimately led me down the journey of finding intuitive eating,
mhm,
of learning more about weight stigma, about weight inclusive practices, the correlation between weight and health,
mhm,
the relationship the correlation between, why we eat what we do,
mhm,
where all of those beliefs come from, um, and so I had the privilege of being able to share that with my colleagues when I was working in a nonprofit back in, like, 2018, 2019.
mhm.
And as I was teaching them, I was getting so lit up by it
Yeah.
that it was like, "Okay, we can talk about food differently. We can talk about nutrition differently. There's ways to talk about these things to actually bring upon effective behavior change
Mhm.
without it coming from such a shameful, scary, diety place.
Yeah.
And with passion, just was like, I'm gonna go off on my own and try to do this and help people have a healthier relationship and view on food and ultimately their bodies.
Hmm.
So that was the
That's
very long
awesome.
version of how
No,
we got here.
I love that because it
Mm,
really does show that like you had a passion. And I think even from you growing from an idea of like I can help people lose weight and that idea to transforming into wait, that's not the right direction. We need to
mm,
come from it from like a supportive, nurturing, holistic well-being point of view is just beautiful. And I
mm.
think that that is what sometimes we feel when we think about going to a registered dietitian is like we're going to get the first version, right? And that
Yeah.
we're going to get that like kind of shamey and almost worried about making changes because of how it might impact our mental health. And so it's beautiful that like you've created this platform and this business
Mm.
surrounding marrying that, right? And like marrying that with focusing on mental health and like well-being and how to eat healthy and make good choices, but without shaming ourselves or focusing on our body.
Yeah.
That's
Thanks.
amazing.
Thanks.
Good. And then, what does like education look like for a registered dietitian?
Great question. So, to become a dietitian, it requires a 4-year bachelor's
Mhm.
and then followed by a internship. So, I want to say it's 1,200 hours of an internship where you're in the field getting actual um, applied experience in the
Mhm.
fields. And then after that, there are continuing educations that are required
Okay.
every few years to maintain that credential. And then I also should have included that there is an exam to become a dietitian. So there's a national exam following school and the internship that must be accredited, and then continuing education hours following. Something that people ask often is what is the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist?
Just what to ask.
Um, and so to be a nutritionist, there is no credentialing behind it. Really, anyone
Mm,
can call themselves a nutritionist.
gotcha. Okay.
Um, Not to say there aren't great nutritionists out there, but also just being cautious, like with the public,
Yeah.
of being curious about where we're getting our information from,
Yeah.
especially with platforms like Instagram and
TikTok.
TikTok, right? Anyone could just put nutritionist in their bio tomorrow if they wanted to, and
Oh.
there's no credentialing behind it, which is so interesting.
That is actually very interesting because I never knew that. I would have never
Mm.
known that. And I think a lot of people pair the two to be almost like interchangeable. And I can see how that would be really damaging potentially.
Yeah,
Just because obviously going to school, having tests, continuing education, that means that you are using evidence-based practices.
sure.
But someone who is claiming to be a nutritionist doesn't have to follow those same guidelines.
Right. And
Interesting.
oftentimes there's a lot of fear mongering that comes
Mhm.
with not having the evidence-based practices being applied in what we're
Yeah.
sharing, especially on social media, right? So just a lot of like fear-based ideas about food,
Mhm.
which ultimately makes eating nutritiously or healthy really challenging for people.
Yes. And I'm sure that's where disordered eating can come from when there is this constant exposure to um, non-evidence based, but just even like fad diets or take this out of your diet, you'll see change. And or
Sure.
this nutritionist said that I will lose weight if I do that. Right. So that's how those things can kind of turn into disordered eating or kind of a fixation on connecting what I eat to my weight and my worth.
Yes.
And what is intuitive eating, just in case? Because I think I hear it a lot on TikTok, and we don't always know if that is real information. So I'd be happy to hear like what you have to say about intuitive eating.
Sure. So, intuitive eating is a non diet approach to nutrition that really focuses on honoring internal cues for body versus external rules.
Mm,
So it's a framework of 10 different principles, really helping people to come back to that inner intuitive eater
mhm,
that we like to argue that everyone is born being. So we're born having really great cues and understanding
mm,
of what our body needs, what our hunger cues look like, of what our fullness cues look like, of what we want to eat for a meal, how much we need. And oftentimes, through our society, through well meaning parents,
mhm,
social media, slowly we lose touch of that and we start to lean into others of what we should or shouldn't be doing,
mhm,
which really pulls us away from that inner intuitive eater. So the work that we do with clients is really helping them come back to trusting their bodies,
mm,
trusting themselves,
mhm,
being able to understand what foods feel good in their bodies, what foods don't feel good in their bodies, what a balanced plate might look like.
mm,
Coming really going back to this idea that your body has all the internal wisdom. We
mhm.
just have to trust it,
Yeah.
and it's a lot easier said than done,
Yeah.
right?
But I think that that is why that's so connected with mental health too, is because when you're challenged with like anxiety or even trauma, there becomes a lot of distrust in yourself or your own decision making. And so I'm
Mm,
sure that can come along with disordered eating or maybe some troubles with food. Is that correct?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely,
So you
absolutely.
start to think that you're making poor decisions, and there's so much emphasis on that when we think about diet and weight loss and healthy eating, choosing healthy foods, not bad foods. So when you go for that bad food, then suddenly you're like, wow, I cannot be trusted with this in my house, right?
Yes.
So interesting. What kind of training did you go through for intuitive eating?
So I there is an intuitive eating counselor training. So the intuitive eating was developed, or the frameworks were developed by two dietitians, and they have I want to say it was like a three-part process and then an exam at the end. So there was supervision involved, obviously reading the book and the workbook, completing the exam, and then there was just like modules essentially
Okay.
to really learn more about the frameworks and how to apply them with clients. I feel as though in the last few years that intuitive eating word or terminology has really been hijacked by social media.
Mhm.
And I used to be really big on sharing intuitive eating and using the terminology intuitive eating. And what I was finding with clients is they were really just turning it into another diet,
Mhm.
or they were comparing themselves to what intuitive eating looks like on social media.
Gotcha.
And it started to be a little bit harmful to
Mhm.
clients. So I've actually like really retracted how much I use that terminology,
Mhm.
because at the end of the day, the frameworks that I'm using in helping people find a healthier relationship with food, I
Mhm.
don't need to call it intuitive eating. I don't need to define it so much,
Yeah.
but really just go back to the frameworks surrounding it
Yeah.
and really diving into people's relationships with food and how they got there and helping them find health and what that might be defined specifically for them.
Yeah.
Um, because, yeah, so much has gotten wrapped up in intuitive eating and so much comparison
Mhm.
that really hasn't been super helpful.
For sure. Yeah.
So it's been an interesting couple years of like coming to that and
Yeah.
really defining how I like to work with people. And maybe we don't need to use that terminology.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very similar to sometimes clients when they're in therapy can get really turned off from terms like mindfulness or coping
Mm,
skills because there is such that pressure and like that's what it's kind of almost like weaponized online to be like, oh, this will change your life, and then when it doesn't, they're like, no, 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 I don't want to do that. So
yeah.
same thing in just like encouraging it in different ways, like maybe imagery or relaxation or just changing those words so it's not so like triggering
Mm,
or connected with things that are found on social media that are not
yeah.
true or factual.
Yeah. Thanks for that comparison. I haven't heard that
Yeah,
one.
it's really interesting, just because I came across on a social media post of all things, but it was a therapist group that was talking about like how that can be triggering for some people, and I
Mm,
started to really connect with like how people might be resistant to different strategies because of what they hear on social media. So,
yeah.
very social media.
Yeah. Yeah. I know specifically with the intuitive eating stuff, it's very much like typically a really thin person eating a donut on a camera and saying, just eat the donut, right?
Mhm,
Which is so harmful. And I don't think I realized the harm in that a couple of
mhm,
years ago.
mhm,
But really recognizing how inaccessible that is for so many people
mhm,
and yeah, weaponizing it
mhm.
can be. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a great comparison though. Thanks for
And
sharing that.
I think with social media too, speaking on the inaccessibility of like healthy foods, I think
Mm,
that that's highlighted on social media when there are people who are claiming like all you have to do is incorporate these into your diet, and
hmm.
how inaccessible those items are for some people
Yeah.
can just be so discouraging because it gets you into a mindset that you will never get out of where you are
Mm.
because you can't access those things that other people are saying will change your life.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so with intuitive eating, what kind of things are you seeing on social media that have been coming up either in your practice or just maybe really get you upset or wanting to advocate?
Yeah. I think it's the comparison traps, right?
Mhm.
The misinformation around body diversity, this idea that health is a choice and we can all just wake up one day and choose to be healthy. I'm having a visceral reaction right now.
I know that one is just whew.
Yeah. And, this idea that we, these diseases just come upon us because of what we're eating or how we're moving our bodies or like fitness influencers talking about what they eat in a day, and then having really vulnerable teenagers or adults seeing that and getting wrapped up in, oh, well, oh, I should be eating this every day, or I eat too much. And really emphasizing and talking to clients about you're they're showing you their version of a perfect day of eating,
Yep,
right? And we don't even know if that's actually accurate.
yep,
And we don't know what they ate the day before or the day after or why they're eating that, right? There's so much wrapped up in it and so much comparison because we're really taught not to trust our bodies. So, it makes sense that we're looking
yeah.
outward. Um, I think that also really speaks to parents. Parents really struggling of like,
Mhm.
how do I feed my kids? Or what should I be feeding them? Or wanting to raise kids that have a healthy relationship with food, but also getting wrapped up in the perception of
Mhm.
health versus true health,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah, those are a lot of the trends I would say that really stick out for clients right now. Um, But I do also see the trends of like body diversity,
Yeah.
which is really cool. I don't know if you've like seen teens talking a little bit more about body diversity, feeling a little bit more confident in their bodies, understanding that body diversity naturally exists.
Yep.
I think right now I see it more with parents of really doing that education and training
Mhm.
and learning and unlearning about their perceptions of health.
Mhm.
Honestly, more so than a lot of teenagers right now, which I guess that's the part where I'm like, okay, good job, Instagram and TikTok.
Yep.
Good job.
And what do you see most in your practice with your clients?
Yeah, so we work with eating disorders.
Mhm.
So like more acute, explicit um, things that might be coming up with food. But I think it's really important to emphasize too that I think we think that eating disorders have a look, right?
Mhm.
You have to be underweight, you have to look visibly sick, you have to be eating nothing or very little. And that's just not true. Most of our clients might not look like they have an eating disorder or a disordered relationship with food. I want to say the statistic is like 6% of people with an eating disorder have like the stereotypical look of an
Mm.
eating
Wow.
disorder, right?
Mm.
Wild statistic. So what we're doing mostly with our clients, what we're seeing the most within our practice right now is people who are really just sick of dieting,
Mhm.
really caught up in that mentality of restriction and realizing that it's not working,
Yeah.
understanding that diets don't work for themselves, but maybe starting to have children or coming into your first career and realizing, okay, something's not working here. I'm thinking about food too much. I'm feeling really obsessive with food. I'm really afraid of eating. I have really poor body image. And I don't want to go through this anymore. And I want to find more neutrality with food and more neutrality with body. Um, so we're seeing a lot of that right now, which is really beautiful. A lot of parents who wanting to really do that work for themselves for their
That's
kids.
awesome.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Um, Also just like going to the doctors and maybe getting a medical diagnosis
Mhm.
and not wanting to have to go through full restriction
Mhm.
to be able to cope with the medical diagnoses.
Mhm.
I personally love that because it's really empowering people that you don't have to lose weight, you don't have to restrict, you don't have to cut out everything in your diet just because something might have come up, but really empowering people to be their healthiest version of themselves while also eating and feeling really good in their
Mhm.
bodies.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, almost like a extra support system in those situations too, like where they are like experiencing some sort of medical diagnosis.
Yeah,
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 love
absolutely.
them.
Mm.
Yeah. What in those situations is implemented? So, like, what does an appointment with a registered dietitian look like?
Yeah. And I can't speak for all dietitians, but we very much take an individualized approach in that a lot of our sessions are really diving into the conversations surrounding food and surrounding body image, really diving into the why behind things, what worked the previous week, what didn't work, really understanding our hunger cues, maybe in a session, learning about where we feel hunger in our bodies, maybe unpacking where some of our beliefs around food came from, our beliefs around health.
Mhm.
So, a lot of the work that we're doing is more in that. Um, that one-on-one conversation. A lot of our clients call it food therapy.
I was gonna say it sounds very much like psychotherapy, or like developing where those root causes come from, and then using that to change behaviors, right? Like kind of like CBT.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
And personally, I think that's where the dietetic training went wrong.
Mhm.
I think that that's what we should have been trained on.
Yeah.
We should have learned how to support behavior change and how to have those conversations with our clients that are coming from a place of empowerment
Yeah.
versus shame.
Yeah, definitely.
And that is not what our education system looked like, which is
Mhm.
really, yeah, it's a bummer. We also weren't trained on eating disorders either in school,
Oh,
or it
okay.
was a very vague training,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
Which is why I really encourage people when they are looking for support to make sure that they're finding someone that has the training and specialties that they need
Mhm.
for whatever they're looking for support from a dietitian with.
Yeah, definitely. Making sure to find a dietitian that is going to like empower you, like you said, and has a knowledge that it's more than just diet and more
Mm.
than just food, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What are some final thoughts related to you, tap into nutrition?
Mm. Yeah. So we are accepting new clients. We offer a free discovery call for anyone who's interested in learning more or wants to talk about what that might look like for their specific scenario. So they can find us, they can schedule that on our website. We hopefully will be doing some new support groups in the new year. Those have always been really fun,
Yeah,
especially like
sounds
going
good.
into a new year to have a non-diet new year is just a great kickoff when there is so much emphasis on new year, new me, needing to
Yep.
shred the weight, right?
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, those are some fun things that we're doing right now.
Yeah.
We work with kids, teens, and adults, and we're currently accepting new clients. And so, yeah.
Good, good. And where can anyone find you if they're interested in learning more about you or any social media that Tap into Nutrition has?
Yeah, so we have an Instagram. You can find us at Tap Into Nutrition. And then our website is tapintonutrition.net.
Okay. Good to know. Awesome.
Hmm.
Well, thank you so much for coming here and just making sure that we know everything there is to know about being a registered dietitian, but also intuitive eating and
Hmm.
the impacts from social media. This has been amazing.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.